So we're working on our revision for our AQA History, Conflict and Tension in Asia paper, and we've got our first task, which is getting to the grips with the fundamentals of the Cold War, which is what actually was the Cold War. And remember, this is really important in terms of explaining all the future events in our story in terms of what's going on with the United States and Korea and Vietnam. So let's get on with it, shall we? In the mid-1900s, two superpowers, the United States and Russia, the USSR, had two very different ideologies. This meant they had very different ideas about how countries should be run. The USA was capitalist, whereas the USSR was a communist country. Each country believed that their ideology was the best and they wanted it to spread across the world. And here we have a summary table of the different beliefs between those two superpowers, capitalism for the USA, communism for the USSR. And it's broken down in terms of political ideas, so ideas about how countries should be run, and economic ideas in terms of how money should work under their respective ideologies. So what we've got to think about now is we've got to think about this first task in our revision booklet, which is quite simple, but really important to get to those fundamentals, which is completing the table to show the beliefs of capitalism and communism. So it's nothing too taxing, so we're just going to use this up here to complete down here. Now I've got a red pen, so I'm going to work through the answers just to show you exactly what you need to put down. So in terms of capitalism, one key political belief is in free elections. So people should be free to choose who they want to run the country. Now, we've got to bear that in mind. That is, in principle, that's what capitalist countries like the USA believe, but as we will find out later on in our story, that is not necessarily applied consistently. They also believe in freedom of speech. That means people are free to speak out against the government, whereas communism believes in dictatorship. And that means that one person has complete power in a country. So when we talk about our two communist countries, we talk about North Korea and North Vietnam, both of whom we encounter later in our story, both of whom are communist countries, both of whom have dictatorships, and we'll meet our dictators later on in our story. And of course, the other big one we've got to mention is China. China also has a dictatorship. Russia also has a dictatorship. So if we move on to our economic, so this is the belief in private ownership. So that means that companies, businesses and factories are owned by a person, an individual, or a company separate from the government. So capitalists believe that the government and businesses should be separate, and people should also be free to make profit, to make money. Remember, we're using our table up here to help us with this. So another important aspect of communism, on the other hand, in terms of economy, is nationalization. That means businesses and factories should be owned by the government. And they also believe in the redistribution of wealth. That means that goods and profits should be shared equally to reduce inequality. So what that means is they share out money so that there's no such thing as rich or poor. So everybody in the eyes of communism should be equal. All right? And what we've got here is we've got this key term, and that is the Cold War. So the Cold War is the phrase that is used to describe the tension between the USA and USSR. And this lasts for many years, for decades. War never actually broke out between these two countries. So at no point during this period did we have a conflict between the USA on the one hand and the USSR on the other. However, what they did do is they fought what we call proxy wars. And these are conflicts between two smaller countries on behalf of larger countries. And they usually, those bigger countries, provide weapons and financial help so that they can fight each other. So the two superpowers aren't stupid. They don't want to fight each other. What they'll do is they'll just get little countries to team up with them and fight each other on their behalf. So that's really important. So that's where Korea and Vietnam come into our story. And the differences of ideologies are really important. Each of our ideologies hate each other, particularly the USA. So the USA feared communism and they saw it as a threat to freedom. So that explains why the USA decides to get involved in Korea and Vietnam. Everything they do is based on a fundamental belief that communism is a threat to freedom. Freedom is so important. And what the USA are doing are fighting to protect freedom. So that is your first task. And we're going to go on to task 2 in just a little bit.